Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. This will have spoilers for the 2018 game. Alright, so I'll be honest, I usually avoid videos like this close to release. In a little over a month, Spider-Man 2 will be out, and there probably won't be a ton of reasons to come back to this video, but in watching all the trailers and coverage recently, I just can't help it. I want to talk some Spider-Man, especially after seeing everything that's been unveiled. So right here, I want to talk about my biggest hopes for the game, what I'd love to see from the story, what I'm excited for in the gameplay, and some long shot stuff that I hope to eventually see in this series. So all signs indicate that Spider-Man 2 is shaping up to be a very polished game, but I know some people are a little disappointed that it's building so much on the foundation of the first game instead of radically moving things forward, especially in terms of the swinging mechanics, which are still more technically simple than the other Spider-Man 2 game back on the PS2 in a lot of ways. That's a criticism I can understand, especially after it already feels like they've kind of double dipped a bit on this formula with the Miles game. But honestly, once I take in the scope of what this Spider-Man 2 is aiming for, I think those concerns might be a little overblown. Now, the swinging in these Spider-Man games is simple in comparison to the old Spidey 2. That's just a fact. But going back and replaying it, which I did a year or two ago on my GameCube, I can see why they went with the style of swinging that they did. That game had a really steep learning curve, far more than you'd probably assume for a best-selling movie tie-in game. And though the system was pretty ingenious, it may not hold up as well as you remember it, proving to be frustratingly finicky a lot of the time. No disrespect to that developer, what they pulled off in a very short development cycle was pretty miraculous, but there's a reason even Treyarch themselves simplified things in Ultimate Spider-Man, their greatest achievement and the main reason I wish someone would let them out of their eternal Call of Duty prison. While I do wish there was fall damage in the Insomniac games, and I think that would add a lot more tension to the swinging, I think the swinging itself is still incredibly fun, and the additions they're bringing in to both the swinging and the combat seem pretty welcome. I think the web wing gliding looks great, I just hope they don't overtake the core of traversal too much and I find myself gliding more than swinging, but just as a concept, I think it'll be really rewarding to mess around with. And you know, really this is as good of an excuse as any to mention that if the vintage comic book suit is back in the game, they should definitely add the Ditko accurate web wings. Speaking of suits, and sorry, I know this is pretty nitpicky, but like many out there, I was not too impressed by the original costumes that they've revealed so far. For the most part, they seem painfully over-designed and often just serve to bog down the genius original Spider-Man suit design. Thankfully, that's just a handful of the 65 that apparently made the cut, and most aren't originals. Now, my ideal situation for the costumes is probably never happening, but I'll describe it anyway, and feel free to add to it or even disagree. It was nice to see the Raimi and Webb suits in the original game, and the Spider-Verse movie costumes were especially cool because they changed the actual size and style of the character. I'd love to see them double down on this, and incorporate both other Spider-Man media and Spider-Man comic art styles. I know the rights would be a nightmare to arrange, but I'd love to choose between different eras of Spider-Man cartoons and comics. Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man animated show, John Romita's Spider-Man, the Spider-Man 1967 cartoon. Just being able to flip between them I think would be amazing, and would be a lot more fun than some of these palette swap suits. It'd be cool if each had a version for Miles too. I'd love to see his costume reinterpreted in the style of, say, Tim Sale or the 90s animated show. And while I'm just spitballing here, I want to see this taken even farther and have the option to replace the character models for the villains with a few classic styles in New Game Plus. As someone who doesn't love the tech-heavy Insomniac designs for most of these guys, I'd really appreciate being able to get like Scorpion in this classic costume. And I've seen some PC modders pull it off pretty well too. Now, Sony and Marvel probably aren't in a hurry to pay all those creators, but I'd love to see them make those deals and make all these different art styles possible. The cel-shaded vintage comic book suit was my favorite costume in the first game pretty easily, and I really want to see them go down this path farther, and while they're at it, be less vague about which comic book artists they're using as inspiration, because artists like Ditko or Romita Sr. deserve the shoutouts. As for gameplay features, I think the attention that they've paid to giving you more stealth options is pretty smart. I usually love going with the stealth approach in games, like honestly I really miss it as a whole genre. I'm the guy that's desperately begging Ubisoft to make another real Splinter Cell game, but the stealth in Spider-Man got old kind of fast. Okay, maybe not that fast, maybe after dozens of hours, but still, as an experience it didn't come anywhere near the combat gameplay. The ability to shoot web lines of your own to walk across should add a lot to making the stealth feel less on rails and more of a product of your own creativity, and I'm hoping that comes with a lot more takedown options as well. I like the ability to switch between Miles and Peter on the fly, complete with what I assume will be GTA 5-like drop-in animations, where we see what each one was doing when we're not controlling them. I also like having missions that can only be completed by one or the other. From a story perspective though, it definitely complicates things. Insomniac has set a pretty high bar for themselves here, as they're gonna have to serve both characters really well, and not just in the main story campaign, but in all the side missions too. I'm a little skeptical they can totally pull that off. I liked a lot of the story choices in the first game, but honestly, I think Insomniac's version of Miles has been completely outdone by the Spider-Verse films. Now, they have a huge opportunity to change that. One of my issues with Miles in his own game was that there wasn't enough tension and conflict within the core cast, aside from the villains. The symbiote storyline could really turn that around, with this idea that he's going to have to deal with a Peter that's becoming more extreme and more violent, with Miles having to go up against his mentor. There's a lot of predictable paths they could take with that story, and I hope they surprise me and do something unexpected. Now, one thing I have liked about the marketing for this game is how little it's emphasized Venom. Obviously, we saw a glimpse of him pretty briefly in the earliest teaser, and we know he's being voiced by Candyman himself, Tony Todd. But aside from that, the marketing has shown us almost nothing about how he's going to play into the story. I think that's a smart move, and it's pretty obvious that Kraven and the Lizard are going to be early game villains, with Kraven probably taking up the largest chunk of the game before things get handed off to Venom, much like Mr. Negative and Doc Ock in the first game. Now, the previews have been very generous with showing off the Lizard set piece, and because of that, I'm kind of expecting him to mostly be contained to the first few hours of the game. Maybe even just one series of missions, which would be fine with me. I'd rather have post-Lizard Kurt Connors be a big character in the game, which is usually a more interesting version of that character, but maybe that's just me as someone who has read and watched this poor man accidentally transform himself into a monster approximately 6,000 times. Back to Venom though, I think it's a safe bet to say that they're going for a more menacing vibe than like the fun sidekick villain of the PS1 game or the slapstick comedy duo of the movies. And while I like both of those versions, honestly PS1 Venom has a very special place in my heart. That's probably the smart move if they want to make him the big bad at the end and the consequence of Peter's actions. With Venom's origins, writers tend to get a lot of leeway with how they change things up, simply because the original Eddie Brock origin kind of leaves a lot of room for improvement as far as motivations go. Insomniac seems to be stretching things even farther from that origin because I don't think Eddie Brock is going to be in this game at all. Now, I don't know that, I haven't looked into spoilers or anything, but there's been nothing in the marketing that would lead me to believe Eddie is a major or even minor character. And of course, thanks to the ending of that first game, Harry seems very positioned to take the Venom mantle. Now, I did talk about this in my previous video on Spider-Man 2, but I'm really torn about this, because Eddie Brock has never been a completely consistent character in the comics, and they've done all sorts of strange reinventions of him over the years. Now, I can't judge how a Harry Osborn Venom will be yet. All we really have to go off of is some audio logs from the first game and some cutscenes. But it's going to be really hard to make this not feel like a Goblin story with a Venom skin. Still, I love how they handled Doc Ock in the first game, so I'm placing my trust in them here. I also do kind of hope that Venom is eventually playable in this game because that was such a fun part of Ultimate Spider-Man. Anyway, Spider-Man 2 is my most anticipated game of the year, and I'm really excited to see what surprises they could still have up their sleeves for us. But what do you think? What are you most excited about, skeptical about? Do you have any big costume opinions? I'm looking forward to hearing it all down in the comments. We can't all be scientists like Peter Parker, but we can still improve and make our STEM skills better every day. That's why Brilliant helps you tackle math, science, and computer science concepts like AI and neural networks in a fun way that always fits into your schedule, even if you can only spare 15 minutes a day on your phone, tablet, or computer. I've really been enjoying Thinking in Code, which gives you the fundamentals for how computer logic operates with a series of challenges that are actually fun. Just in general, there are thousands of lessons here, and they're always adding new ones. It's a really enjoyable and intuitive way to learn, and helps build you into a lifelong learner. So go to brilliant.org/midnight and try it for free with a 30-day free trial. And the first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. That's brilliant.org/midnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.